Night like every night I spent there, I had trouble sleeping and got up in the middle of the night. I looked out the window across the guest house and I froze when I saw
Nightmare Files.
My name is Eric, and this happened to me when I was around 7 or 8 years old. One summer, my dad took me to a campsite for a long weekend. When we arrived, there were some kids around my age playing in a small park. I looked at my dad and he said, "Go ahead." So my dad unpacked the car and I went to maybe make some friends. There were two boys in a small park. I said hello and they said hello back. Their names were Kevin and Graham. Graham had to go shortly after because his parents were calling for him. So Kevin and I hung around and we talked about things we liked and how long we were staying at the campsite. After about an hour, Kevin's mom was calling for him, so we had to leave. I was about to head back to my dad when a boy appeared from the woods. He said hello. I said hi back. He introduced himself as Daniel. He seemed like a nice kid and we got along pretty well. He asked me if I wanted to play hide and seek, so I said yes. We played hide and seek at the campsite for maybe 45 minutes until I told him I had to go, so I went back to my dad and went to the camper. I told my dad I had made some friends and my dad asked where their campers were. I told him where Kevin and Graham's were, but I never asked where Daniel was. I thought maybe, I'll see him the next day and I'll ask him then. So the next day I went outside to see if any of the kids wanted to play. Kevin and Graham were both unavailable. I was about to just return back to my camper when Daniel appeared out of nowhere, out the woods. We greeted each other, and I asked him if he wanted to play hide and seek again. He said yeah, but he said we should play at his house. I asked him where his house was, and he told me it's not far, it's just through the woods. I followed Daniel in the woods toward his house. We were walking for ages, and one thing that I found unusual was the more we walked, the less talkative and distant Daniel became. Eventually, we exited the woods, and Daniel said, "Here we are." He pointed at a rundown old house with a white van parked beside it. He started walking toward it. I slowly followed and asked Daniel, "So this is your house?" He replied by saying, "Yeah, let's go play hide and seek." I got this bad feeling, and it became worse the closer we got to the house. It didn't look like a normal house. I started to notice that there were people standing by the windows inside the house. I asked Daniel if that was his dad in the window, and he said, yeah. Don't worry about him. He's harmless," and just continued walking. I don't know what it was, but something made me slow down. Daniel was by the front door at this point, and when he turned around, asked me if I was coming. I told him I had to go. I turned around and ran through the forest and back to my camper. I spent the next few hours watching TV. Then I got bored and decided to go back outside. I knocked on Graham's door, but he wasn't available. I knocked on Kevin's door, and his dad told me he was already out with some boy named Daniel. So I went back to the camper and did something else with my time. Late that night, there was a knock on our door. It was Kevin's parents. They asked if we had seen Kevin anywhere, as he's been gone for hours. I asked his mom if she had checked Daniel's house, and she said no because she didn't know where Daniel lived. I showed Kevin's parents along with my dad and a few other people through the woods to Daniel's house. When we got there, the van was gone. And when we knocked on the door, there was no answer. And the whole house was empty and abandoned. We didn't find Kevin for the rest of our time at the campsite, and he's still missing to this day as far as I know. I thought then, and still think today, that Daniel was some kind of bait to lure kids in the same age as him to be kidnapped. And I'm thankful my gut sensed danger and told me to leave. My name is Jack, and growing up, my younger brother and I, who's 2 years younger than me, had a complicated and somewhat difficult childhood. I won't go too much into details, private and personal, but there were a lot of occasions where my brother and I, whose name is Brian, would move around the country a lot and live with different relatives and sometimes friends. This one time, I think I was about 10 and Brian was 8. Our dad was driving us across the country for a reason I can't remember. I don't know what time it was, but I know it was dark and late. When we finally stopped for the night at a motel, it was even darker. After checking into our room, which was on the ground floor, our dad said he was leaving to do something and he'll be back soon. He said he'll bring back a pizza and told us to not leave the room. There was nothing to do in our room and we didn't know how to work the TV, so I suggested that we play hide and seek. Brian was to be the seeker. I left the room and ran upstairs to the floor above us, around the corner behind an ice machine, and waited. I had a clear view over the motel and could see Brian looking around for me. I remember standing behind the ice machine giggling and watching my brother walk around the motel in the pool area looking for me. Then the door behind me slowly creaked open, revealing a large man that looked to be in his late 40s. Had a dirty white tank top on, and he seemed overweight. He asked me in a friendly voice what I was doing. I told him I was just playing hide and seek. He then asked me if I was playing with my parents. I told him no, just my younger brother. At this point, Brian was upstairs and found me talking to the man. The man asked if our parents knew we were playing hide and seek. Brian spoke up and said no, our dad left us. The man then asked Brian and I if we wanted to come inside to watch cartoons, and he had some cookies and milkshakes for us as well. Me and Brian looked at each other and then looked back at the man and said, okay. And we entered the man's motel room. We sat down on the bed and the man turned the TV on and he put on some cartoons. I can't remember what cartoons it was though. He then said he would be right back and was going to get our milkshakes and cookies. The man went into the bathroom. I got up and I took a look into the bathroom to see what the man was doing. I was confused at why he didn't go in the kitchen. He had 2 glasses of water and then put a little bit of white powder in each glass. Thinking at the time it was just the ingredients to make a milkshake, I sat back down on the bed. When the man finally came out of the bathroom, he handed me and Brian a glass each. He said, "Here's your milkshakes." It didn't look like milkshakes at all, at least not one that I've ever had. It looked like it was just water with white powder floating around. I suddenly had this bad feeling in the pit of my stomach telling me I was definitely in danger and we needed to leave. Brian was about to take a sip of his drink. I stopped him and the man was still watching us, just silent. Out of nowhere, the man just asked us, "What's wrong? Drink your milkshake." This time in a much less friendlier tone than he had been speaking to us before. I looked at the man and he was looking at me, waiting for me to speak. I then said, "We always eat cookies first before we drink our milkshakes." The man let out an irritated sigh and went back into the bathroom. I put the glass down on the floor and quietly did the same with Brian's. I grabbed Brian's arm and quickly exited the man's room. We ran around the corner and down the stairs into our motel room. I turned out the lights and I kept watch out the window. After about 5 minutes, the man came down the stairs and started his car. I was feeling a bit of a relief, thinking he was just about to leave the motel. But he got out of the car and looked directly at the window I was looking through and started approaching our room. I remember panicking at the moment, thinking that the man was about to take us. He was getting closer to our door when our dad pulled up and asked the guy what he was doing. The man didn't say anything and just walked away and went to his car and drove off. We never saw him again. When our dad asked us who that man was, we told him we didn't know. Brian and I never spoke about this incident again to anyone. I sometimes have nightmares about if we did drink that man's drink and what would have happened to us if we did, or if our dad didn't come back in time. name is Lewis. Growing up, I had a best friend named Joe. We would always hang out at each other's house and play outside together. His grandfather had a successful life and lived in a big private house by a lake. It had a separate guest house and a small boat next to the home. There were occasions where Joe would invite me to stay over the weekend at his grandparents' house. I don't know why, but I always had trouble sleeping when I stayed there. I think it was just not my usual bed, and that's why I couldn't sleep. So Joe and I used to play hide and seek a lot, and it was even more fun and exciting at his grandparents' house. I remember Joe's grandpa was away for a weekend of fishing with his friends, and his grandma was cooking dinner. She told us to go outside to play as it wouldn't be ready for a while. So me and Joe decided to play hide and seek. Joe was the seeker and he counted to 100 in the kitchen, and I went outside to hide. I went into the guest house and hid upstairs in the closet, as the guest house was always open, and we would commonly use it as a hiding place along with the rest of the property. I remember sitting down in the closet waiting. I don't know exactly for how long though. Eventually, I heard footsteps slowly coming up the stairs. It was Joe, I remember thinking, and he was about to find me. The door slowly opened, and I looked through the gap of the closet. I couldn't see perfectly, but good enough. At one point, Joe looked directly at me, and we made eye contact. I thought at the moment he found me and the game was over. But he must have not have saw me because he turned around and went back downstairs. Shortly after that, Joe's grandma yelled for us till dinner was ready. I exited the closet and went inside the main house. When I saw Joe, I had a grin on my face and asked him how he didn't see me, because he looked directly at me. He asked me where I was, and I told him I was in the closet upstairs in the guest house. He then looked at me confused and said he didn't even go in the guest house. The only place he looked was in the main house and the backyard. I then said, "But I heard you go up and down the stairs." He said it wasn't me. I asked him, "Then who was in the guest house?" He said he didn't know, and he ushered me to the living room to eat dinner. Later that night, me and Joe were playing video games, and I asked him if he was joking with me, that he didn't check the guest house while we were playing hide and seek. He said he swore he never went in there. That night, like every night, I spent there. I had trouble sleeping and got up in the middle of the night. I looked out the window across the guest house, and I froze when I saw someone watching me. I woke Joe up and I told him that there was someone in his guest house. Joe looked with me, but the person wasn't there anymore. Joe told me to go back to sleep as I was just seeing things. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. Joe and I remained best friends after this incident, but I never visited his grandparents' house again.
Nightmare Files.